Welcome to episode 2 of our series about the future of leasing in Latin America. Today, I want to share with you something that is very important. We have learned in our human existence that we need to learn where we come from. In our particular case, at the end of the day, our DNA is very material to define what are we able to achieve in our lifetime. And the same thing can be told about the nations and regions, in particular about Latin America. I believe that we need to understand our history in order to be able to understand how we can achieve something material in the future. So this is the journey I invited you to follow in this episode 2 and afterwards as well. So the question is, remember our first question is why continents so rich in natural resources, so rich in assets, is nonetheless very poor? And I think that the first answer to that question is because most of this is dead capital. How did we get there? And I would say that we need to start probably of what started changing our status quo. We don't know what would have happened if the conquistadores have ever come to the Americas. Probably we will be happy populations living in peace from Mexico to Peru, probably the strongest in the indigenous population, to the Muiscas and some other races that were not as strong and were practically disappear. Could be also the Araucarians in the south of Chile and so on. But the conquistadores came in 1492, and they started looking for something that was necessary for them to become rich. And that something was found in Peru and in what is today Mexico, New Spain. In Peru, in Alto Perú, Potosí, and in Zacatecas and Guanajuato, the Spaniards found silver. And silver was, at that time, the currency of the time. You can also hear about El Dorado and the pursuance of gold, but gold was not exactly the currency at the time. It became later on. So once they found silver, of course, they found the philosophical stone to wealth. And that basically brought together what we can call today investment. Infrastructure was built. The infrastructure was, at that time, mule trails to connect the mines with the ports, 45 harbors. And basically, we were talking about very famous fortified ports like Veracruz in Mexico, Cartagena in Colombia, Portobelo in Panama, and Havana in Cuba. And we'll see how Panama became an interesting place because Vasco Núñez de Balboa discovered the Panama Isthmus. It was a very short separation between the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. The Portuguese, remember that at that point the two empires were Spain and Portugal, and they came to the Pope, and the Pope, Alexander VI, decided to just divide the world in two, and they say, guys, out of the, I think according to the Tordesillas Treaty, you take a portion of the world out of certain meridian, and that meridian divided what the Portuguese could take. So long story short, the Portuguese took Brazil, and they found there sugar, gold, and coffee. And sugar and coffee gave rise to big plantations. And of course, that generated an accumulation of capital in the hands of a few. Gold mining started also played a very important role in Minas Gerais. But Brazil certainly needed to develop and extract all this wealth. And for that purpose, not existing enough manpower, they brought that manpower, leveraging in the nascent trade of slaves in Africa that the Portuguese were the pioneers of. Actually, the Portuguese were the most influential in bringing African population to Latin America. And then the Caribbean is a kind of secondary point, because the Caribbean was also very rich in the possibility to grow sugar, and it became a very important strategic place to own, to the point that the Dutch, for example, decided to hand over New Amsterdam to the British. Today, New Amsterdam is Manhattan, is the whole core of New York, because the Dutch wanted to keep Suriname, that was very rich in sugarcane. And the same happened in the Treaty of Paris of 1763, when France decided to surrender New France, today's Canada, instead of giving up to the rich island of the Caribbean, like Guadeloupe, Martinique, and most important, what for them was called Saint-Domingue, today Haiti. So these were the richest areas for plantation of sugar, and that was the most important wealth that was coming from the colonies to Europe. But of course, in the Caribbean as well, manpower came from Africa. So when I was in Angola early this year and I visited the Museum of Slavery, the number is impressive. 12 million Africans were exported to the Americas. Around 6 million landed in Brazil. Around 3 million landed in the Caribbean island, and the rest was divided in all the different countries, including the United States of America. So here we have a situation which is the colony gave us some cultural inheritance, which basically shapes the way we function nowadays. And we need to understand that, because this is exactly what determines the machinery of how the society is going to evolve. The first important point, it was extreme concentration of land, and therefore of the assets that were alive, that could be collateralized. And the origin of that comes from two institutions from the colony. The encomienda, that was especially from Spain, was a grant given by the crown to certain conquistadores, where they receive extensive pieces of land, and with that a lot of indigenous population as slaves, the manpower they have there, and that was giving a perpetuity for the conquistadores and probably their succession. And the plantation was the second one, again owned by a few, but that was the source of wealth and therefore the source of credit. The second big cultural factor is legal systems built for control rather than commerce. So the purpose was controlling the behavior of the colony. Remember that one of the main drivers was the evangelization, the conversion into Christianity of all the indigenous population, and they should be bound by a very strict of codes, the leyes de Indias, as you can see there. Well, that gave a legacy. The first legacy is that the system, the legal system, became extremely formalist to the point of exaggeration. Second, it instituted the notary, that was a kind of nothing was legitimate without the intervention of a notary. Nothing is legitimate without the intervention of the notary. There is no presumption of good faith from anyone. No, you need to go to a notary to prove that you are an honest person. And the third one, and most important, is a very weak protection of movable property interest. That is something extremely important, and in a way it became the opportunity for leasing, but at the same time it created a very misguided conception that even today the central banks and the regulators in the financial system are committing the sin to believe that after the Industrial Revolution, still mobile assets are worthless. And the third legacy, which is very important, and we need to take that into account, is that the infrastructure was shaped with kind of geometry looking outside, but nothing in the inside, nothing addressed to promote inner commerce, mobility within the vast regions, vast and rich regions. Everything was going from the mines to the ports, from the plantations to the ports, period. So comes Napoleon in 1804, started invading different countries in Europe, and one of them was Spain. When Spain was weakened, then the independence movement started to work. But it was funny because the independence movement was in a way induced by the ideologies of the French Revolution about equality, fraternity, liberty. That nobody believes in that. Everyone sings that, but nobody really believes in that. But there was the pretext for the dominant class living in the colonies to get rid of the possibility to be accountable to the crown. And then the independence came between 1810 and 1870. But the process destroyed the mining economy, the little things that were already there, and drained all the capital of the region. In addition to that, because there was no sense of nationality, there was no sense of a shared culture, the idea was, okay, so let's do organize the territories exactly the same way as they were organized under the colonization. And that was the way things worked. Then immediately, at least a couple of interesting visions came into place. The United States was shaping a very successful federal project with the 13 colonies and the other states that later joined. And then Simon Bolivar brought the idea of the Gran Colombia, that was the territory of what today is Colombia, Panama, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Panama was part of Colombia. And the second project was the Federal Republic of Central America that came into place while the Gran Colombia kind of existed between 1819 and 1831. The Central American Federal Republic of Central America existed between 1823 and 1841. And they were dissolved by the same reason. I mean, it was a personal interest, no teamwork at all, no leadership in terms of a social value, is what we call caudillismo. And of course, there was chronic instability. They started to fight with each other. And of course, that bankrupt led to the default of the loans in the London markets. The British banks were the ones that were financing in the independence movement and some other needs for the new nations. And of course, there was no single indigenous bank. That was the situation that take us around 1870. But the good news in that period is that some capital came for infrastructure. It came more as asset finance, not loans. And most of that came from the British investment in railways, tramways, especially one of the beneficiaries of that was Argentina. Then between 1870 and 1929, these countries started to export commodities. We can call that the first globalization times. And you see how Argentina, exporting beef and wheat, became by 1913 one of the richest countries on earth, one of the 10 richest countries on earth on a per capita basis. That didn't last, unfortunately. Brazil was leader in coffee, Chile in nitrates and then copper, Mexico in silver and then oil, Colombia in tobacco and then coffee, Central American coffee and bananas, Cuba in sugar, and after 1914, Venezuela discovered oil and it became the big bonanza. What happened with the railways? That's a very interesting story, and we need to take that into account because one of the questions we ask today is why we don't have a strong railways in Latin America. I must tell a personal anecdote. I was appointed as chairman of the Emerging Market Task Force of the Luxembourg Protocol to the Cape Town Convention. The Luxembourg Protocol adopted a framework to provide for secure financing, legal protection for secure financing, cross-border secure financing for rail assets. But I was forced to give up that job because there was no resonance at all in any of the emerging markets, in particular in Latin America. There is no investment in railways. We represented some rail companies in the past, and we could close a couple of deals, one in Mexico, another one in Brazil, but period. And this is very, very limited. But railways are practically inexistent in Latin America. And but in the 1870s to 1929, a couple of projects actually happened. One probably a little bit earlier, the Panama Railroad that was built in 1855, that was built to serve the California Gold Rush via Panama. Remember that we have the isthmus, and it was a very important place where you can really trade gold. And then later on in 1904, the Panama Canal, which has a different story. We are going to share with you that story. But the bottom line here is that that asymmetry created that logistic costs in Latin America are still 50 to 100% higher than the normal logistic cost of any other country in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. So we have a competitive disadvantage in terms of the cost of transportation because of that, because of how we are backwards in that area. Then comes 1929 with the global depression. In that global depression, the import substitution model started to work, and then we have what we can call the inward turn. I'm going to stop here because I'm currently running to the minute 17, and let's follow up in episode number 3, starting from here, from the times of the Great Depression. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you in episode number 3.